What to expect for the marriage-based interview with USCIS. That's what we're talking about on today's episode of Sumner School Family Immigration Basics. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law. Let's talk about this. So what should you expect when you have a marriage-based interview with USCIS? So first of all, the goal of this interview with USCIS, or the purpose, is for the USCIS officer to confirm that your relationship, your marriage, is a true relationship and not just for purposes of a green card. So ideally, you've already submitted documentation of your relationship when you filed the I-130 and the I-485. This is an opportunity for them to talk to you in person, to read body language, to ask additional questions, for you to submit additional documentation, and also for them to verify additional information that they may have questions about. When and where does this interview happen? It happens at your local USCIS office. It typically happens towards the end of the green card process. So usually our clients receive the notice for the interview about 9 to 12 months after filing the package with USCIS, although that can vary, of course, depending on location, depending on a variety of factors, but typically about 9 to 12 months after you file. USCIS will send you a notice that has the exact date, time, and location of your interview. So what can you expect before, during, and after your interview? Before your interview, I always recommend that clients bring the documents, of course, gather the documents ahead of time that you'll need for the interview. This video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended for individuals that are doing this on your own. You absolutely should speak with immigration counsel or an immigration lawyer before you take action or decide what to do. This is not intended to replace legal advice. It's just general guidance. But in general, the documents that you'll want to bring for the interview are, and this is not all inclusive, but in general, you want to bring documentation of your ID. So your passport, your driver's license, proof that the petitioner, the person who is sponsoring, the spouse that's sponsoring, is a US citizen or permanent resident. For the foreign national applicant or beneficiary, you want to bring their birth certificate, any documentation of any criminal charges, even if they've been taken care of. We also tell clients to bring documentation of traffic tickets, updated documentation of your relationship, updated financial documentation, that type of thing. Again, this is not legal advice and that is not a comprehensive list, but that's the type of thing you want to think about starting to gather. For the interview, the day of the interview, make sure that you know where you're going. If you haven't been to that office before, scope it out ahead of time if you can, so you know where you're going. If you arrive at the office early, they may not let you into the office or into the building more than half an hour in advance. So I always tell clients, if you get there early, stop and get a cup of coffee or something. When you are going into the building, you will present your ID and your interview notice. You will go through a metal detector. Typically, they will direct you to a reception desk, and that person will look at your interview notice and then direct you to the waiting room. You can have a seat there and the officer will call your name when they are ready for you. Be prepared to wait. It is not uncommon to have to wait for the immigration officers to be running late and for you to have to wait for your immigration interview. So be prepared for the possibility of having to wait. When the officer is ready, like I said, they'll call your name and you will go with the officer to his or her office. When I say you, typically these interviews happen together, not always, but typically they will call the foreign national's name and the spouse, petitioning spouse, will go with them and the interview will happen together. So both of you will be in the room with the officer at the same time for the duration of the interview. That's not always the case. An officer can separate a couple either from the get-go. I've seen that happen from the very beginning. They'll say, oh, I only need to speak with Jane Doe right now, and then they'll call John Doe later. Or they may initially have an interview together and then call you back for a second interview, or that same day separate you and ask questions of each of you independently. It can happen either way. Doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong, although sometimes they do separate couples if they suspect fraud or something else going on. But most of the time the interview is together. So when you go into the officer's office, first thing they'll ask you to do is take an oath to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. They will confirm your identity. Then they will start going through the forms that you submitted. So you will be sitting in chairs across a desk from the officer. The officer will have a paper file, at least as of the time of this recording, which is in June of 2025. They'll have a paper file and they'll go through the forms that you submitted and ask you to confirm information. Things like your full name, your date of birth. They may ask about your immigration history, your residence history, your employment history. They may ask you to confirm the security questions that you've answered on the forms. I always tell clients that you don't need to memorize anything, but definitely be familiar with the information on the form so you don't give conflicting information. In addition, the officer will ask questions of the couple about their relationship. Like I said, that's one of the main purposes of this interview, is to make sure it's a true relationship and not just for purposes of a green card. The officer really can ask anything, but typically the questions are pretty straightforward. Things like, how did you meet? When did you meet? How long have you lived together? They may look at one of you and say, how many siblings does your spouse have? Or they may look at the other one of you and say, what are the names of your spouse's parents? They may ask questions that they don't really know the answer to. So they may say something like, what did you have for dinner last night? Or what do you like to do together? They may look at one of you and ask a question of the other to see what your response is. So they may look at, for example, if we're talking about John and Susan, for example, who are being interviewed, they may look at John and say, Susan, what's your favorite thing about John? To see what John's response is. So they will ask questions. Sometimes they ask a lot of questions and they're very, very detailed. Other times they ask hardly any questions at all. It really depends on the officer, how much time they have, how much documentation has been submitted previously, and how authentic that seems, how much documentation is available and how much they believe that documentation. All different factors affect how many questions they may ask. Typically, the interview lasts around 30 to 45 minutes. It can last longer than that or shorter than that. I tell clients that generally speaking, that does not mean that there's anything wrong. Again, it depends on the officer themselves, their interviewing style, how many questions they like to ask, how much time they've had to review the file ahead of time, that type of thing. Typically, at the end of the interview, the officer either will say something like they're going to recommend that the case be approved, or they may say something like, thanks for coming in, we'll let you know. If they say that, that does not necessarily mean that anything is wrong. It is common for them to say that. It means that they are not ready at that moment to make a decision. And after that, a number of things could happen. Usually, at least for our clients, usually the case is approved within about 2 to 4 weeks after the interview, if not sooner. And clients receive the green card in the mail within that time frame. Even if the officer has said, thanks for coming in, we'll let you know. It is possible that you would receive a request for evidence or a notice of intent to deny, which is when they ask for additional documentation for either one of those situations. They may give you a piece of paper at the time of the interview that has a list of potential documentation and has something checked off that they need you to submit to the office. Or it's possible that they would deny the case without asking for additional documentation. That's not common, but it is within the realm of possibility. So like I said, typically, even if they don't say at the interview that the case that they're going to recommend the case be approved, most of the time the case is approved without further ado, without further questions or documentation within a couple of weeks after the interview, but not always. They can ask for additional documentation. Most of the time the officers are, and this varies of course by office, but most of the time in my experience, the officers are kind and professional, but not always. So if you are in a situation where it seems like the officer hates everything that you're saying, they're not smiling, they're being aggressive, my recommendation to clients in general is to stay as calm and professional as you can, not to reflect that energy back to them. To take a deep breath. It's unpleasant in the moment, and it may or may not signify that there's actually a concern with your case. It may have absolutely nothing to do with you. I tell clients all the time, immigration officers are people too. Maybe they had a fight with their spouse that morning, or maybe they have something else that's going on in their lives that are making them appear this way and interact this way, but it could have absolutely nothing to do with your case. So take a deep breath. It's unpleasant in the moment, but that too shall pass. After the interview, like I said, typically clients receive the green card in the mail. They might have a request for further information. One thing to keep in mind is if you have been married for less than 2 years when you receive the green card, the foreign national beneficiary, the person applying for the green card or the applicant, will receive what's called conditional residence. That means the green card itself is valid for 2 years, and you have to apply to remove the conditions within the 90-day window before that green card expires. I hope that you have found this information helpful. If so, I hope you'll share this video with a friend or a colleague. Comment below, let us know what questions you have. We can't give legal advice through comments on social media, but we're happy to help however we can. There will be information following this video about how to contact us. So if you're thinking about starting this process, if you're exploring your options, we would be happy to have a consultation. We'd love to have a consultation with you to talk about your options and the best strategy for you going forward and to help you walk through this process. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law, serving clients around the world and around the United States with family-based and employment-based immigration matters. Until next time.